Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next session of the Inspiring Women Transforming Science virtual event from the Rosalind Franklin Society. My name is Phelan, Senior Editor at Gen Biotechnology, Gen's sister peer review academic journal publishing original research and perspectives. And it's my pleasure to be moderating this session and introduce our speaker, Dr. Judith Absalon. Dr. Absalon is an adult infectious diseases physician and experienced clinical researcher with more than 20 years of experience. She has spent the past 15 years contributing to the development of antiviral drugs and vaccines. Dr. Absalon joined GSK in October 2021, where she serves as Vice President and Clinical Sciences Disease Area Lead of Infectious Diseases and Virology. Prior to joining GSK, Dr. Absalon was a Senior Medical Director in Vaccines Research and Development at Pfizer, where she contributed to the licensure of a serogroup B meningococcal vaccine for adolescents and young adults, led a Group B streptococcal maternal immunization program, and led the clinical development team for a novel RNA vaccine for the prevention of shingles. In 2020, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, Dr. Absalon was a core team member on the mRNA COVID-19 vaccine clinical development program. And it's our pleasure to have her with us today. Dr. Absalon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Faye. And I appreciate the invitation to speak today. I think what I wanted to do, and hopefully we can have a nice discussion, but what I wanted to start off with was really to talk about how I got here, how my path to becoming a clinical researcher in pharma, and hopefully we can spend the end of the discussion talking about some of the challenges being a woman of color in this space. So I am a native New Yorker. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, to immigrant parents from Haiti. I have always wanted to be a physician. This was something that I remember wanting to do from single digits. Part of that need was because I saw the pattern in my family. So we have physicians in the family, and so it wasn't something that was unusual. And I think this is a theme that's important when I talk to younger girls and young women in their journey in STEM or in medicine. After college and med school, I spent a bulk of my career training in New York City at Columbia University and Harlem Hospital. I completed my internal medicine residency and my infectious disease fellowship at Columbia and part of my ID fellowship at Harlem Hospital. I then, because I had always wanted to have a large impact on infectious diseases, I completed a master's in public health at the end of my fellowship in epidemiology. I then stayed on faculty at the School of Public Health at Columbia for several years before I transitioned into pharma. My first role was in HIV drug development at Bristol Myers Squibb. I'd been working on HIV prevention research while I was at Columbia, particularly doing work around sexually transmitted infections and the prevention and the prevention of HIV through the modification of sexual behaviors at the time. Many who start in academia will tell you, at least back then, that the transition from academia to pharma is not always easy. And so I wanted to stay in a space that I was comfortable with. And so I went on to BMS to do antiviral drug development and worked on HIV drug development, particularly doing one of the first trials, phase 3 trials in pregnant women, giving a cocktail of medicines. After several years there, I transitioned back to New York and took a role in vaccines because I felt that that melded my interest in public health, epi, but maintained my interest in infectious diseases. My family immigrated to the United States in the 60s from Haiti. And so I've always understood the dramatic and sometimes fatal impact of infectious diseases, but also how we could prevent much of that harm through vaccines or medicines, and certainly with antibiotics to treat very simple infections. But I also understood the impact of lack of access. And so I've always wanted to have a broader reach as a physician. I stayed in Pfizer vaccines for over a decade and had the opportunity to contribute to licensing two vaccines, novel vaccines in epidemic and then unfortunately in pandemic settings. So the meningococcal B, serogroup B vaccine is at the time we've had meningococcal vaccines for children, but not for all of the serogroups. And serogroup B was one where that was increasing and impacted particularly young adults and adolescents, particularly those in college. And at the time that we were developing the serogroup B vaccine at Pfizer, there was an outbreak around 2013 that lasted a few years at several colleges in the US. And the level of the outbreak was much higher than we had seen in those regions. And luckily, we had been in the process of developing this vaccine, and through close collaboration with regulators, we're able to accelerate that development and successfully license the vaccine, which is now available for all college-age students and even younger adults. Towards the end of my tenure at Pfizer, so in 2020, I think we all were similarly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, and I had the opportunity with many of my colleagues at Pfizer to work on the COVID-19 vaccine. And that really was a huge accomplishment in my career, but I think for many in the world, also a huge impact on everyone personally. At the end of 2021, an opportunity at GSK became available and allowed me to go back to drug development as opposed to vaccines and biologics. And I've been at GSK for the past 2 years, leading a team of excellent clinical researchers and expanding our infectious disease drug portfolio. And here I'm spending more time working on strategy and big vision, but it's a great opportunity to be able to be at a company that has not only a large focus on infectious disease drug development, but also including HIV, but also has a large vaccines portfolio. So I've come full circle in a sense, because I've started in drug development. I spent a large part of my career in vaccines, and now I've circled back, and it's given me a breadth of experience and knowledge that I truly appreciate. One of the things that I was asked to talk about today was really my perspective on being an African American woman in this space. I think what has been interesting, sometimes difficult, is being the only one in the room. And I think as my career has progressed, I've learned to have a bigger voice. I think to a certain extent, I've become used to being the only person that looks like me in the room, but have tried over the years to increase those numbers through mentorship, through sponsorship, both during my work time, but also my personal life. One of the things that I think I've been lucky with, and this comes from my family, is the reason I decided to be a math major in college, the reason I, decided to go to medical school, the reason I've always continued to be in this space is because no one in the family made me feel like I couldn't. And one of the things that I've tried to do is I've taken on more senior roles in industry, in academia. I continue to teach periodically, is to encourage all students and all, junior faculty or junior colleagues, but particularly women of color, I encourage them to keep going and to have confidence. I think that was one of the things that I needed to grow into. And some of the work that I did at Pfizer allowed me to demonstrate to myself what I could achieve. So my career is definitely not yet over, but I've learned quite a bit on this journey, and I'm continuing to challenge myself, challenge the organizations that I'm a part of to do the best that we can to diversify the workforce. And because I spend all of my time working on clinical trials or speaking about clinical trials, one of the big issues, in addition to having researchers that look like me, is also having the appropriate representation of diverse patient populations and study participants in our clinical drug and vaccine development work. And so um, over the past couple of years while I've been at GSK, what has been impactful is the time, the resource, and the conversation that the company spends on the issue of diversity, equity, inclusion, both as it relates to clinical trials as well as the employees who are part of the organization. The last thing I'll say is it occurred to me as I was preparing for this talk today that I've had the opportunity to work under powerful women of various races and ethnicities. But when I was at Columbia, the head of my infectious disease program was a woman. The head of the ID Epi group that I joined as faculty was a woman. My first boss in pharma at BMS was a woman. The head of our vaccines research and development group at Pfizer was a woman. And the company where I am now is led by a woman CEO. So I think I've been lucky in the sense that I've seen female leadership, and I've seen women of color in leadership positions, but there certainly aren't enough of us, and I take that as a action for myself every day to try to improve. So with that, I think that is a little bit of my journey, and hopefully we can have some targeted discussion about what else needs to be done. Okay.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Absalon, for that powerful description of your journey. And as you mentioned, here at the Rosalind Franklin Society, we're here to give voice to diversity and emphasize the importance of diversity. And that conversation is incomplete without intersectional identity. And as you mentioned, talking more about the challenges and also how to support other women of color, other individuals who do come from an immigrant background. And so, what advice would you have for other individuals who are facing the results of that intersectional identity and the combinatorial challenges that come with that experience?
Sure, that's a great question. It's a tricky one, right? It's hard. Um, it's interesting because I think a lot of times we're asked to be in one category or another when I check a lot of boxes, right? For lack of a better way. And what I would tell people is to show up as your authentic self. If I think about my trajectory and through lots of schooling, several different jobs, I'd probably say that this is the time in my life where I feel my most authentic. I'm a pretty transparent person, but over the years, I've definitely had to adjust who I am or how I present myself in a room to fit other sort of expectations. And I think if you show up as your true authentic self, then you don't have to check a box. I am a child of immigrant parents. I'm a Black woman who was born in the United States, so I consider myself African American, but I also consider myself Haitian American, and obviously I'm a woman. So I I now show up with all of those perspectives. Sometimes the conversations will lean, one way or the other, right? Sometimes I'm the only woman in the room and not the only person of color. Sometimes I'm the only person of color, and maybe not the only woman. So I think really it's just showing up as you are, which sounds quite simple, right? It sounds like a very basic thing to say to people, but um, it's not so easy. I'm hoping that it's easier for younger people to show up as themselves, as we move through society. But that allows you to tap into all. It allows me to tap into all aspects of who I am.
I love that, showing up as your authentic self, and it reminds me of this theme of community that you had also brought up in your discussion, where I believe you said nobody made you feel like you couldn't,
Yeah.
which which is so wonderful. And a big topic of discussion is mentorship and having people to look up to, people who look like you, who are able to support this journey. And so, did you have any key mentors that supported you in your journey, and any advice in finding that community, supportive community?
Sure, that's a great question. I mean, I think both mentorship and sponsorship are important, and I'll explain the difference. I think most people are familiar with mentorship. I don't know that I had real mentors, right? So I had mentorship in some of my department heads and bosses who I think were excellent and guided me. But as I progressed in my career, I got to understand what true mentorship was. Um, and it is a little bit distinct from maybe having someone who you're working with in the same area day to day, right? And oftentimes mentorship is sporadic is probably not the best word, but it may be infrequent, right? And it really, I tell people that you should look for mentors early, and you should look for multiple mentors, right? And so in my early career, when I started to think about mentorship, I thought I would have one mentor and that would be it, and that person would guide me for the rest of my career. And in fact, you should have multiple mentors that provide something different. So it may be someone who's in the same field. It may be someone who is a personal mentor. It may be someone that's guiding you to think about career on a broad scope, and it may be somebody who's helping you in a very specific way. The other thing about mentorship is I tell people now that it's bi-directional, and the best mentorship relationships are ones where I'm doing something for the mentee, but the mentee is offering something to me. I think mentees don't often think that they have something to contribute, which is completely false, right? So when I give talks to medical students, I get to hear what they're thinking about now, right? Because it's very different than what I'm thinking about. I get to learn about all the newer technologies and how they're using AI ML. Even though I talk about that in my business, I don't necessarily know the practical day-to-day aspects of it, right? So there's always something as a mentee that you can offer. And I think when I talk and mentor younger or more junior people, when I say that and tell them that they too have something to offer, it breaks down a wall because it's scary, right? It's very intimidating to say, "Oh, I want to be this senior person and I want to just go up to them and say, 'Hey, would you mentor me?'" And it's not always, sometimes you have to go through it a few times before you find a good fit. But mentorship is key, and it's important to start doing that early because then you learn how to do it well. And I do try as much as possible to mentor people, and sometimes it's a one-off conversation. Sometimes it's a regularly scheduled conversation. I always offer my contact information when I give a lecture, um, to medical students, to fellows, to, people that I talk to in pharma. And the interesting thing is probably less than 10 or 15% of people actually contact me, because I think there is an intimidation factor. What am I going to say? How do I keep this going? And so I try when I talk to people to, get them not to worry so much about that, and say just most senior people actually do want to talk to you and help. And it's really a 20, 30-minute conversation that, and what I find, it doesn't take anything away from me. And I often come out of the conversations learning something myself. The other thing that I would say is sponsorship, particularly when you are in a work environment, is critical. And so you can have mentors who give you advice or kind of help shape you. But what's critical in career development is to have a sponsor, meaning someone who is in the room when decisions and opportunities, when decisions are being made and when opportunities are available, to say, hey, I know someone that would be a good fit for that position. And I think that is one of the major areas where we start to see, in my opinion, the reasons for disparities, in, all aspects of my work in pharma, in academia, because I think if you don't have someone who's bringing up your name, or people are not aware of your capabilities and could essentially vouch for you, it makes it more difficult to get those opportunities. And if you don't get the opportunities, you don't have the ability to show what you can do. So mentorship and sponsorship.
That's such a great portrait of the importance of networking, mentorship, and community as a whole. And I really love how you're emphasizing the importance of people at those higher titles making themselves approachable and putting your name on that slide after your talk to bridge that gap,
Yeah.
and make it more accessible for these medical students or whoever they are in the beginning of their journeys to reach out. And with that, I know your personal journey has come from medical school all the way to GSK, and I'm curious in how that journey came about. I imagine, is that something where when you entered medical school, you had an idea of where you wanted to go in terms of pharma? I imagine a lot of medical students are thinking, what is next for me in the next
Yeah.
few years of my career?
So it's interesting because I think the tide has shifted a bit. So when I was training, particularly in academia, going into pharma was not really something that was a great, regarded as a great thing. And most of us thought, well, I will stay in academia, or I will do private practice, or I'll be, stay and see patients in hospital. And I did do that for a while. I think for me, so the easy answer to your question is no. I had no idea that I would end up working in pharma and that I would stay in pharma. What the one thing I've been consistent about in my career is I tend to do things that I enjoy. And so I knew I wanted to be a physician. That was always a childhood dream. But there's so many different avenues, right? And so I knew that I liked people, but I wanted to help people on a broader scale. I like data. I like looking at data, and I like numbers. So I was a math major in college and pre-med. I also like to write, and I do it well. So as I trained, and the thing about being a physician, at least in the United States, is a lot of it is there's a path that's laid out, for several years, and then you have to make a decision. And so I had time, and as I discovered epidemiology and discovered that I like to teach, I realized that I could do clinical research, and that actually brought together a lot of my personal interests, right? So I liked being a physician, but I didn't really like being in the hospital. And so if I did clinical research, I could impact patients' lives, but I can also do the things that interested me. And that's how that started. Um, and then when the opportunity came to consider pharma, I made sure I started in an area that I was passionate about, which was HIV. And once I got there, I realized that some of the things that I wanted to achieve, which was, how can I contribute to health care um, bigger in a bigger way, right? So I can see patients in my community, which I did and I enjoyed, but that really is an individualistic touch. And I always wanted to be able to say that I contributed something that really could span beyond New York City, could span beyond the United States, because again, I came from a background outside of this country, and I hoped that I could do something that could reach beyond where I was physically. And so actually, pharma allowed me to do that, right? Because we make drugs on a large scale. And I've always been at pretty large companies, and so have had the opportunity and have been lucky to see vaccines and drugs go to the end and be approved and then be licensed and then be recommended for use in the populations that needed them. So it was really just keeping the thread of what I'd like to do. I found my way. I don't think anybody should sort of have a straight line. Life doesn't work that way. And I think you miss opportunities. So when I talk to people, I say, figure out what you like, and build your job and your career around what you like. And so I've been lucky. I've been able to do that. And, so far, so good.
Yeah, I love that compass. And we're just about to wrap up for this session. But my last question for you, Dr. Absalon, is there a slogan or a motivational phrase that you would go to in terms of day to day going forward in your career, facing those challenges? What would that piece of advice
my
be?
my branding that I don't have. I think I just honestly I just keep going. I just keep going. It's not a hashtag, but but I just keep going. And I think if for me it really is about contributing to healthcare and making it better for people. And I with that I'm able to block out some of the noise. I generally enjoy my work, and I just want to continue to contribute. So I just keep going.
All right. Hashtag keep going is a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Dr. Judy Absalon, for being with us today and sharing your personal journey and all of those powerful insights that I'm sure our audience are going to take away and flourish in their careers.
Thank you,
So,
Faye, and thank you for the Society for inviting me to speak today.
all right. Make sure to tune in for our next session at the Rosalind Franklin Society virtual event. Take care.